My name is Liza, and I am from Spain. I grew up in a small town near Madrid. I love my home, my family, and my friends, but I have always dreamed of something bigger. I want to learn English and I want to see the world. So, one day, I made a big decision. I would go to New York to learn English. It was not easy to make this decision. My family was worried. My mother especially did not want me to go so far away. Liza, she said, New York is a big city. You don't know anyone there. It's dangerous, and your English is not very good. How will you talk to people? But I was determined. I had been studying English for a few years in school, but I knew that to really learn the language, I had to go to a place where everyone speaks English. I wanted to be in the middle of it all. I wanted to live in a city where I could hear English every day, everywhere I went. So, I saved money for many months. I worked part-time jobs and tried to practice my English as much as I could. Finally, the day came when I bought my plane ticket. I told my family that I was ready to go. My mother cried, but she hugged me and said, I know you will be okay. You are smart and brave. You will learn English and you will have many adventures in New York. The flight to New York was long. I was nervous, but I was also excited. I had never been on a plane before, and I'd never been to the United States. As the plane flew over the ocean, I looked out of the window and saw clouds and water below. I tried to sleep, but it was hard. My mind was too busy thinking about what my life would be like in New York. When the plane finally landed, I looked out of the window again. This time, I saw tall buildings and many lights. It was night, and the city was glowing. I felt a little scared, but I reminded myself that this was my dream. I had to be brave. After the plane landed, I went to get my suitcase. There were many people in the airport, and everything was happening so fast. People were walking quickly, talking loudly, and looking at their phones. I felt a little lost, but I knew I had to keep going. I finally found my suitcase and followed the signs to leave the airport. Outside, I saw many yellow taxis lined up, waiting for people. I had read about New York's yellow taxis before, but now I was seeing them in real life. I walked up to one of the taxis and said, Hello, I need to go to my hotel, please. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror and smiled. Where's your hotel? He asked in English. His accent was strong, and I had a hard time understanding it at first, but I tried my best to listen carefully. I took out a piece of paper from my bag and showed him the address of my hotel. Here, I said, this is the address. He nodded and started driving. As we drove through the city, I looked out of the window in amazement. New York was so big. There were so many tall buildings and so many people walking on the streets. Even though it was late at night, the lights from the buildings and the cars made the city feel alive. I felt excited, but also nervous. Everything was so new. The people, the streets, the language. It all felt different. I knew this was where I wanted to be, but I also knew that it was going to be hard. I had to be strong and focus on my goal to learn English. When I arrived at my hotel, I thanked the taxi driver and checked in. The woman at the front desk smiled and said, Welcome to New York. How can I help you? Her English was fast, but I understood most of what she said. Thank you, I replied, trying my best to speak clearly. I have a reservation. She asked me for my name, and I gave her my passport. After a few minutes, she handed me my room key and pointed to the elevators. Your room is on the 3rd floor, she said. Enjoy your stay. I smiled and nodded. Thank you. I took the elevator to my room. When I got inside, I felt relieved. The room was small but comfortable. There was a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out onto the street. I sat on the bed and looked around. This was my new home, at least for now. I was tired from the long flight, but I couldn't sleep. My mind was full of thoughts about the days ahead. Tomorrow I would go to my new English school. I was excited to meet my teachers and my classmates. I hoped that they would be friendly, and I hoped that I would learn quickly. But at the same time, I was worried. What if my English wasn't good enough? What if I couldn't understand the teachers? What if I couldn't make any friends? These thoughts made me feel anxious, but I reminded myself that I had come to New York for a reason. I had a goal, and I had to work hard to achieve it. The next morning, I woke up early. I got dressed and looked at the map to find the way to my English school. It was about 20 minutes away from the hotel by bus. I felt a little nervous about taking the bus, but I knew I had to try. After all, I was here to learn, and that included learning how to get around the city. I walked to the bus stop and waited. There were many people at the bus stop, and everyone was talking in English. I listened carefully, trying to understand what they were saying, but it was difficult. Some people spoke very quickly, and others used words that I didn't know. When the bus arrived, I got on and found a seat near the window as the bus drove through the city. I looked out and saw many different neighborhoods. Some areas were very busy, with shops and restaurants on every corner. Other areas were quieter, with trees and parks. After a while, the bus arrived at the stop near my English school. I got off the bus and walked to the building. It was a tall building with many windows. I felt nervous as I walked inside, but I reminded myself that this was the reason I had come to New York. I was here to learn. Inside, I saw many other students. Some of them were from other countries, just like me. I heard people speaking in different languages, but most of the conversations were in English. I felt a little shy, but I knew that I had to talk to people if I wanted to improve my English. I walked up to the front desk and said hello. I am here for my English class. The woman at the desk smiled and asked for my name. Leza, I said. Welcome, Leza, she said. Your class is on the second floor in room 203. Just take the stairs and you will find it easily. Thank you, I said, trying my best to sound confident. I walked up the stairs and found room 203. Inside there were about 10 other students. They were sitting at desks, and there was a teacher at the front of the room. The teacher smiled when she saw me. Hello, she said. You must be Liza. Welcome to our class. Please take a seat. I smiled and found a seat near the back of the room. The other students looked at me and smiled. I felt a little nervous, but also excited. This was my first day in an English class in New York. I was ready to learn. The teacher introduced herself. Her name was Ms. Johnson, and she spoke slowly and clearly, which helped me understand her better. She asked each of the students to introduce themselves, and when it was my turn, I said, Hello, my name is Leza. I am from Spain, and I came to New York to learn English. Miss Johnson smiled and said, That's wonderful, Leza. We are happy to have you here. After the introductions, the class began. Ms. Johnson started by teaching us some new vocabulary words. She wrote the words on the board and explained their meanings. Then she asked us to use the words in sentences. I listened carefully and tried to understand everything she said. At first, it was difficult. Some of the words were new to me, and I wasn't sure how to use them correctly. But I tried my best, and Ms. Johnson was very patient. She helped me when I made mistakes, and she encouraged me to keep trying. After class, I felt good. I had learned new words, and I had practiced speaking English with the other students. I knew I still had a lot to learn, but I was excited about the progress I had made on my first day. As I walked back to my hotel, I thought about how different life in New York was from life in Spain. The city was big, busy, and full of people from all over the world. It was a little overwhelming, but it was also exciting. I knew that I'd made the right decision to come here. I was going to learn English, and I was going to experience things I had never experienced before. That night, I called my mother. I told her all about my first day in New York. I told her about the bus ride, my English class, and the people I had met. "I'm so proud of you, Liza," my mother said over the phone. I could hear the relief in her voice. "It sounds like you're already learning so much." "Yes, Mama," I replied. "It's hard, but I'm trying my best." "I knew you would do well," she said. "Just remember, if you ever feel lonely or scared, we're always here for you. You can call us anytime." "I know, Mama," I said, smiling, even though she couldn't see me. "I miss you all, but I'm okay. New York is big, but it's also exciting. There's so much to see and do, and the people are different, but they are nice. The teacher is patient, and my classmates are friendly." "That's good to hear," she said. "Just be careful and take care of yourself." "I will," I promised. After the call, I felt a little homesick. I missed my family, my friends, and the familiar sights and sounds of Spain. But at the same time, I was excited. I was in New York. I was living my dream. And even though it was hard, I knew that every day would bring new challenges and new opportunities to learn. The next morning, I woke up early again. I had another class at the English school, and I didn't want to be late. I got dressed, grabbed a quick breakfast from the hotel cafe, and made my way to the bus stop. This time, I felt more confident. I knew how to take the bus, and I knew where to get off. When I arrived at the school, I saw some of my classmates from the day before. They smiled and waved, and I waved back. It felt good to see familiar faces. I walked into the classroom and found my seat. Ms. Johnson greeted us with a smile. "Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to practice speaking English with each other. I want you to find a partner and have a conversation. Talk about where you are from, why you came to New York, and what you want to learn. Don't worry about making mistakes. Just try your best." I felt a little nervous about speaking, but I knew that this was why I was here. I needed to practice. I looked around the room and saw a girl sitting by herself. She looked shy, just like me. I walked over to her and smiled. "Hello," I said in English. "My name is Liza. What is your name?" She looked up at me and smiled. "Hello, Liza. My name is May. I am from China. It's nice to meet you, May," I said, sitting down next to her. "It's nice to meet you too," she replied. Her English was slow, but I could understand her. We started talking. May told me that she had come to New York to study English, so she could get a better job when she went back to China. She said that learning English was very important for her because many companies in China do business with people from other countries, and English is the language they use. I told her about why I had come to New York. I said that I wanted to learn English to travel and maybe even work in other countries. I told her that I loved New York, but that it was also a little scary because everything was so different. We talked for a while, helping each other with words we didn't know. Sometimes we used gestures or pointed to things to explain what we were trying to say. It was hard, but it was also fun. By the end of our conversation, I felt more confident in my ability to speak English. As the days passed, I continued to go to class every morning. Each day we learned something new. Sometimes we practiced speaking. Sometimes we learned new vocabulary. and sometimes we listened to recordings of people talking in English. Miss Johnson was always patient, and she made sure that we understood everything before moving on to the next lesson. I also started exploring the city more after class. I would take long walks through the streets of New York, trying to practice my English with the people I met. I would stop at small shops and order food or ask for directions, even if I already knew the way. It was a little scary at first, but the more I practiced, the easier it became. One afternoon, I decided to visit Central Park. I had seen pictures of it before, but seeing it in real life was amazing. The park was so big, with tall trees, green grass, and beautiful lakes. There were people everywhere, jogging, walking their dogs, having picnics, or just sitting and relaxing. I found a quiet spot by a lake and sat down and watched the people go by. As I sat there, I thought about how far I had come. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Spain, dreaming about learning English and living in New York. Now I was here, living my dream. It wasn't easy, and there were still times when I felt homesick or scared, but I knew that I was growing and learning every day. I was becoming stronger, and my English was improving little by little. I took out my phone and called my mother. When she answered, I said, "Mama, guess where I am?" "I'm in Central Park." "Central Park," she said, surprised. "That's the big park in New York, right?" "Yes," I said excitedly. "It's so beautiful here. I'm sitting by a lake, and there are so many people around. It's amazing. I'm so happy for you, Liza," she said. "It sounds like you're really enjoying yourself." "I am," I replied. "It's not always easy, but I'm learning so much, and every day I feel more confident." "That's wonderful," she said. "Remember, we are always here for you. If you ever need anything, just call." "I know, Mama," I said. "Thank you." After the call, I sat for a while longer, enjoying the peacefulness of the park. I thought about all the things I had learned so far, and all the things I still wanted to learn. I knew that my journey was just beginning, but I felt ready for whatever came next. That evening, when I returned to my hotel, I decided to write in my journal. I had brought a small notebook with me from Spain, and I had been writing in it every night since I arrived in New York. I wanted to remember everything about this experience, the good times, the challenges, and everything I learned. I wrote about my first day in the city, my English classes, and my conversations with May. I wrote about my walk in Central Park and how beautiful it was. And I wrote about how much I miss my family, but also how proud I was of myself for being brave enough to come to New York on my own. As I wrote, I realized how much I had already grown. I was still the same Liza from Spain, but I was also becoming someone new, someone more confident, more independent, and more capable of speaking English. I knew that I still had a long way to go, but I was excited for the future. I couldn't wait to see what else New York had in store for me the next morning. I woke up feeling refreshed and ready for another day of learning. I got dressed, had breakfast, and made my way to the bus stop. As I waited for the bus, I thought about all the things I had already accomplished. I had learned how to navigate the city, made new friends, and improved my English. And this was just the beginning as the bus pulled up and I stepped inside. I smiled to myself. I was in New York, living my dream, and I was ready for whatever came next. This was just the start of my adventure, and I knew that there were many more exciting things ahead. End of chapter 1. This chapter introduces Liza's arrival in New York, her first experiences in the city, and her initial steps in learning English. It captures her excitement, nervousness, and determination to succeed in this new environment, while showcasing her interactions with other students and her gradual confidence in using English in everyday situations. Chapter 2. Discovering New York. The next few weeks in New York were a mix of excitement, challenges, and discoveries. Every day, I woke up early, eager to learn something new. I started to fall into a routine, waking up, getting ready for class, taking the bus to my school, and spending a few hours improving my English, but outside of class. I was discovering much more than just a language. I was discovering a whole new world. One morning, after another great class with Miss Johnson, I made plans with May and another classmate, Ahmed, who was from Egypt, to explore the city together. Ahmed had been in New York for a couple of months, so he knew more about the city than we did. He offered to show us around, and May and I were excited to see more of New York beyond the streets near our school. We should go to Times Square, Ahmed suggested as we left class. It's one of the most famous places in the world, and it's not far from here. Times Square, I repeated, feeling a rush of excitement. I had seen pictures of Times Square with its bright lights and huge screens, but I couldn't believe I was actually going to see it in real life. Yes, I've heard it's very busy, May added, looking a little nervous but smiling. But I'd love to see it too. We agreed to meet after lunch, and I went back to my hotel to eat and change into something more comfortable for walking. As I sat at the small table in my room, eating a sandwich I had picked up from a nearby cafe, I thought about how lucky I was to have met friends like May and Ahmed. It made the big city feel a little less scary later that afternoon. We met at a subway station near our school. Ahmed had already figured out which train we needed to take. This was my first time riding the subway, and I was both excited and nervous. The subway was a huge part of New York City life, but I had heard that it could be confusing, especially for newcomers like me. Don't worry, Liza, Ahmed said with a smile as we walked down the stairs to the platform. I'll show you how it works. It's not too hard once you get used to it. I nodded, grateful for his help. The subway station was crowded with people rushing to catch trains. The sounds of footsteps, voices, and trains screeching on the tracks filled the air. I could feel the energy of the city all around me. Ahmed showed us how to buy a Metro card and how to swipe it at the turnstile. After a few tries, I managed to do it right and followed him and May onto the platform. Just pay attention to the signs and announcements, Ahmed explained as we waited for the train. Each train has a letter or number, and they go in different directions. You need to know which one to take and where to get off. I listened carefully, trying to understand everything. It sounded a little complicated, but I knew I would learn with time. After a few minutes, the train arrived, and we got on inside the subway. It was busy, but we found seats together. I looked around at the other passengers. Some were reading books or looking at their phones. Others were talking quietly with friends. It was a mix of people, just like the city itself. New York has people from all over the world, Ahmed said, as if reading my thoughts. It's one of the things I love about this city, no matter where you're from. You can find people who speak your language or share your culture. I nodded. I had already noticed how diverse New York was in my short time here. I had heard people speaking Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, and many other languages. It made me feel less like a stranger in a new place, knowing that so many people had come to New York from other countries just like me. After a short ride, we got off the train at Times Square. As soon as we stepped out of the subway station, I felt overwhelmed by the sight before me. Bright lights flashed from every direction. Giant screens displayed advertisements for movies, music, and fashion, and people were everywhere, tourists taking pictures. St. Performers entertaining crowds and locals rushing to their next destination. This is amazing, I said, staring up at the huge screens. I've never seen anything like this. May looked around in awe, too. It's so bright. Even though it's still daytime, it feels like night with all these lights. Ahmed smiled at our reactions. Welcome to Times Square, the heart of New York City. We spent the next few hours walking around, taking pictures and exploring the shops and theaters that lined streets. We saw the famous red stairs where people sat and watched the busy streets below, and we visited a few stores that sold all kinds of souvenirs. Keychains, t-shirts, and postcards with pictures of the city. At one point, we stopped to watch a group of St. dancers performing in the middle of the square. They were amazing, spinning and flipping to loud music while a crowd of people cheered them on. I couldn't believe how much talent there was on the streets of New York. This city never stops. Ahmed said as we watched the dancers. There's always something happening, no matter what time it is. He was right. Even though it was getting late, Times Square was still full of life. It was a little overwhelming, but in a good way. I felt like I was in the center of the world, surrounded by energy and excitement. By the time we decided to head back, it was dark, but the lights of Times Square were as bright as ever. We walked back to the subway station, tired but happy. As we rode the train back, I thought about how much I had seen and learned in just one afternoon. Back at my hotel, I lay in bed, still thinking about Times Square and the incredible energy of the city. I had only been in New York for a few weeks, but already it felt like I was experiencing so much. Every day brought something new, and every day I felt like I was growing, not just in my English skills, but as a person the next day back in class. Miss Johnson asked us to write about our experiences in New York so far. I was excited to write about my trip to Times Square, but I also wanted to write about how I was feeling. I was proud of myself for coming to New York and for facing all the challenges that came with living in a new country. As I wrote, I thought about how much I had learned. My English was improving little by little, and I was starting to feel more confident when I spoke. I still made mistakes, but that was okay. Every mistake was a chance to learn. Miss Johnson walked around the room, checking on each student. When she reached my desk, she smiled and asked, "How's it going, Liza?" "It's good," I replied. "I'm writing about my trip to Times Square. It was amazing." "That's great," she said. "I can't wait to read it." After class, I showed my story to May and Ahmed. We laughed as we remembered our adventure, and Ahmed promised to take us to more places in the city soon. There was still so much to see: Central Park, the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty. I couldn't wait to explore more. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my life in New York. I continued to go to class, study, and practice my English with May, Ahmed, and my other classmates. We explored more of the city together, visiting museums, parks, and famous landmarks. Each day, I felt more comfortable in my new surroundings. I was learning to navigate the subway on my own, and I was even starting to have small conversations with people in English outside of class. Whether it was ordering food at a cafe, asking for directions, or chatting with my classmates, I was practicing every chance I got one evening. As I walked back to my hotel after class, I realized something. New York no longer felt like a foreign place. It was starting to feel like home. Chapter 3, Building Confidence in a New City. As the days turned into weeks, I became more comfortable with my life in New York. Every day was a new adventure, and every conversation was a chance to improve my English. I was beginning to feel like I could handle anything the city threw at me. Of course, there were still moments of doubt and homesickness, but I was learning how to overcome them. One morning I woke up feeling especially excited. Ms. Johnson had announced that we were going to have a special project in class. We were going to form small groups and give a presentation on any topic we chose. It could be about something related to our home countries, something we had learned in New York, or even something about ourselves. The goal was to practice speaking in front of others using the English we had learned so far. When I got to class, I saw that everyone was buzzing with excitement. May and Ahmed were already talking about what they might present. May said she wanted to talk about Chinese food and how different it was from what she had seen in New York. Ahmed was thinking about doing a presentation on Egyptian history. What about you, Liza? May asked as I sat down next to her. What are you going to talk about? I hadn't decided yet, but I knew I wanted to choose something that felt personal and meaningful to me. I thought about Spain, my family, and my experiences so far in New York. Then an idea popped into my head. I think I'll talk about my journey to New York, I said, about why I decided to come here and what I've learned since I arrived. That sounds great, Ahmed said. You've had such an interesting experience already. I'm sure everyone will love hearing about it. I felt a little nervous about the idea of giving a presentation in front of the whole class, but I knew that this was an important step in improving my English. It was one thing to practice with my friends, but speaking in front of a group was something else entirely. Still, I was determined to do my best. Over the next few days, I worked on my presentation. I started by writing down some key points that I wanted to talk about. I thought about how I could explain why I had chosen to come to New York, how I felt when I first arrived, and what challenges I had faced. I also wanted to share how much I had learned and how grateful I was for the experience. As I wrote, I realized that this was more than just a presentation. It was a chance for me to reflect on my journey when I first arrived in New York. Everything had seemed so big and overwhelming, but now I was starting to feel more confident. I had made friends, I had learned how to navigate the city, and I was improving my English every day. The night before the presentation, I practiced in front of the mirror in my hotel room. I spoke slowly and clearly, trying to remember all the things Miss Johnson had taught us about pronunciation and sentence structure. It wasn't perfect, but I was proud of how much progress I had made. The next day, I arrived at class feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Miss Johnson greeted us with her usual warm smile and explained that we would take turns giving our presentations. Each group would have about 10 minutes to speak, and then the class would have a chance to ask questions. I was paired with May and Ahmed, and we were scheduled to go after a few other groups. As I watched the first presentations, I felt my nerves building. Some of the students were really good at speaking in English, and I worried that my presentation wouldn't be as good. But then I reminded myself that this wasn't about being perfect. It was about practicing and learning. Finally, it was our turn. May went first, talking about Chinese food and the differences between traditional dishes in China and what she had found in New York. She brought pictures of her favorite dishes and even showed us how to use chopsticks. The class loved it, and May's confidence grew as she spoke. Next, Ahmed gave his presentation on Egyptian history. He talked about the pyramids, the ancient pharaohs, and how Egypt's history influenced modern culture. He spoke with passion, and it was clear that he loved sharing his country's rich history with us. It was my turn. I took a deep breath and stood in front of the class. My hands were shaking a little, but I reminded myself that I'd prepared for this. "Hello, my name is Liza, and I'm from Spain," I said. "Today I want to talk about why I came to New York and what I've learned so far." As I spoke, I felt my nerves start to fade. I talked about my decision to come to New York to learn English, how excited and scared I had been when I first arrived, and the challenges I had faced. I shared stories about my first day at the school, my trips around the city, and how much my English had improved since I started the course. I also talked about the cultural differences I had noticed between Spain and the United States. For example, in Spain we usually have a big lunch in the middle of the day, but in New York most people eat lunch quickly and keep working. I found it interesting how different cultures have different habits, and it made me appreciate the diversity of the city. By the time I finished, I realized that I had spoken for almost 10 minutes. The class clapped, and Miss Johnson gave me an encouraging smile. "You did great, Liza," she said. "You've come such a long way since your first day here." I smiled, feeling proud of myself. It wasn't easy to speak in front of the class, but I had done it, and more importantly, I had shared my story. After class, Ahmed and I went to a cafe nearby to celebrate. We ordered coffee and pastries and talked about our presentations. I was so nervous, I admitted laughing. But once I started talking, it wasn't so bad. "You did really well," May said. "I like how personal your story was." It made me think about why I came to New York, too. Ahmed nodded in agreement. It's great that we can all learn from each other's experiences. That's one of the best parts of being in a place like this. We're all from different countries, but we're all here for the same reason, to learn. As we talked, I realized how lucky I was to have friends like May and Ahmed. We had all come to New York for different reasons, but we were on the same journey. We were learning, growing, and supporting each other along the way. The next few weeks passed quickly. I continued to attend classes, study, and explore the city with my friends. We visited museums, went to concerts in Central Park, and even took a ferry to see the Statue of Liberty up close. Every day, I felt more confident in my English and more at home in New York. One afternoon, as we sat in class, Miss Johnson gave us another assignment. This time we were going to practice writing letters in English. She asked us to write a letter to someone back home, telling them about our experiences in New York and what we had learned so far. I decided to write to my mother. It had been a few weeks since we last spoke on the phone, and I knew she would be happy to hear from me. "Dear Mama, I hope you're doing well. I miss you and everyone back home, but I wanted to tell you about how much I've been learning and experiencing here in New York. Every day is an adventure, and I'm getting better at speaking English. I even gave a presentation in front of my whole class. I made some great friends, May from China and Ahmed from Egypt. We've been exploring the city together and learning so much about each other's cultures. I love how diverse New York is. There are people from all over the world here, and it makes me feel like I'm part of something bigger. There are still times when I feel homesick, but I know that I'm growing and learning every day. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and I can't wait to tell you all about it in person when I come home. Love, Liza." After writing the letter, I felt a sense of peace. I knew that my family was proud of me, and I was proud of myself too. I had come to New York to learn English, but I was learning so much more than just a language. I was learning about the world, about other cultures, and about myself. As the weeks went on, I continued to work hard in class and explore the city. My confidence grew with each passing day, and I felt more comfortable speaking English with everyone I met. I knew that I still had a lot to learn, but I was excited for the journey ahead, and I was excited to see what it was like. We met at the subway station near our school early on a Saturday morning. The weather was perfect, sunny, but not too hot. With a gentle breeze blowing through the streets, I felt a sense of excitement as we boarded the train to Brooklyn. This was going to be another new adventure, and I couldn't wait to see what the day would bring. When we arrived in Brooklyn, the first thing I noticed was how different it felt from Manhattan. The streets were quieter, the buildings were lower, and there was a more relaxed atmosphere. It felt more like a neighborhood than the busy, crowded streets of Times Square. We followed the signs to the street where the festival was being held. As we got closer, I could hear the sounds of music and laughter filling the air. The street was lined with colorful booths, selling all kinds of food, clothes, and handmade crafts. There were people everywhere, chatting, laughing, and enjoying the beautiful day. "This is amazing," May said, her eyes wide with excitement. "I've never seen anything like this," Ahmed nodded. Festivals are a big part of life in New York. People from all over the city come to these events to celebrate different cultures, try new foods, and just have fun. I smiled, feeling the energy of the crowd around me. This was exactly what I loved about New York, the diversity, the excitement, and the sense that anything could happen as we walked through the festival. We stopped at different booths to try food from all over the world. We sampled tacos from Mexico, dumplings from China, falafel from the Middle East, and even churros, which reminded me of home. It was like traveling the world without leaving the city. "This is so good," I said, taking a bite of spicy taco. "It's amazing how many different cultures are represented here." "That's one of the things I love most about New York," Ahmed said. "You can find food, music, and traditions from all over the world. It's like the whole world is here in one place." We spent hours exploring the festival, listening to live music, and watching St. performers at one point. We joined a crowd gathered around a group of dancers who were performing a traditional African dance. The rhythm of the drums was infectious, and soon the whole crowd was clapping along to the beat. As I watched the dancers, I felt a deep sense of connection to the people around me. We were all from different parts of the world, but in that moment, we were united by the music, the energy, and the celebration of life. It was a beautiful reminder of why I had come to New York in the first place, to experience new things, to learn, and to grow. After the festival, we walked along the waterfront in Brooklyn, enjoying the view of the Manhattan skyline across the river. The sun was starting to set, casting a golden glow over the city. It was one of those moments that felt almost magical, like time had slowed down and everything was perfect. As we sat on a bench watching the boats go by, Ahmed turned to me and May and asked, "So what's been the best part of your time in New York so far?" May thought for a moment before answering. "I think it's the people. I met so many amazing people from all over the world, and everyone has their own story. It's really inspiring." I nodded in agreement. "For me, it's the same. I came here to learn English, but I've learned so much more than that. I've learned about other cultures, about the world, and about myself. And I've made some great friends along the way. Ahmed smiled. That's what makes this city so special. It's not just about the landmarks or the famous places. It's about the people, the experiences, and the memories you make. I looked out at the skyline, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for everything I had experienced so far. New York had already taught me so much, and I knew that there was still so much more to learn. Every day was a new opportunity, and I was excited to see where the journey would take me next. As the weeks passed, I continued to explore the city and immerse myself in its culture. I visited museums, attended concerts, and even went to a Broadway show with May and Ahmed. It was amazing to see the talent and creativity that filled every corner of New York. One evening, after a long day of exploring, I sat in my hotel room thinking about how much my life had changed since I arrived. I had grown more confident in my English. I had made new friends, and I had experienced things I never thought I would. But there was still a part of me that missed home. I hadn't spoken to my family in a while, so I decided to call my mother. When she answered the phone, I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Liza, how are you, Carino?" she asked. "I'm good, Mama," I said, smiling. "I've been really busy, but I'm learning so much. How is everything at home?" We talked for a while, catching up on what was happening in Spain and how my family was doing. My mother was happy to hear about all the things I had been experiencing in New York, but I could tell that she missed me. I missed her too, but I knew that this was where I needed to be. "I'm so proud of you, Liza," my mother said before we ended the call. "You're doing something so brave, and I know you're going to achieve great things." Her words filled me with a sense of pride and determination. I knew that my time in New York was an important part of my journey, and I was determined to make the most of it. One day during class, Miss Johnson announced that we would be taking a field trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, one of the most famous museums in the world. I had always loved art, so I was excited about the opportunity to see some of the incredible works that the museum had to offer. The day of the trip, we met outside the school and took the bus to the museum. As we arrived, I was struck by the grandeur of the building. It was massive, with tall columns and steps leading up to the entrance. Inside, it was even more impressive, with high ceilings, marble floors, and endless galleries filled with art from all over the world. Miss Johnson gave us a brief introduction to the museum and then let us explore on our own, and I decided to start with the European paintings. As we walked through the galleries, I was in awe of the masterpieces that surrounded us. There were paintings by famous artists like Van Gogh, Monet, and Rembrandt, each one more beautiful than the last. "I can't believe we're seeing these in person," May said, her voice filled with wonder. "They're so much more powerful than in pictures." I agreed. There was something magical about being in the presence of such incredible art. It made me feel connected to history, to the artists who had created these works, and to the people who had admired them over the centuries. After spending a few hours in the museum, we took a break in the museum's cafe. As we sat sipping our coffee and talking about our favorite pieces, I realized that this was another one of those moments I would never forget. New York had a way of surprising me, of showing me new things, and opening my eyes to the beauty of the world. The more time I spent in New York, the more I realized that the city was shaping me in ways I hadn't expected. I was becoming more confident, more open-minded, and more curious about the world around me. Every day brought new challenges and new opportunities, and I was determined to make the most of every moment. As I sat in my room that night, reflecting on everything I had experienced so far, I felt a sense of peace. I knew that I still had a lot to learn, but I was excited for the journey ahead. New York had already taught me so much, and I couldn't wait to see what else it had in store for me. Chapter 5: Facing New Challenges and Growing Stronger. As my time in New York progressed, I began to notice a shift in myself. Every day felt like a lesson, not only in English, but in life. I was learning how to navigate new challenges, how to adapt to situations I had never encountered before, and how to grow stronger with each experience. While the excitement of the city kept me motivated, there were also moments of struggle that tested my resilience. One of the biggest challenges I faced came during a group project in class. Ms. Johnson had assigned us to work in teams to create a detailed report about a famous New York landmark. My group was assigned the Empire State Building, one of the most iconic skyscrapers in the city. At first, I was excited about the project because I'd always wanted to learn more about the building. But as the days went on, I realized that this project was going to be harder than I expected. Our group consisted of 4 students: May Ahmed, a girl from Brazil named Sophia, and me. We all got along well, but we had very different ideas about how to approach the project. May wanted to focus on the architecture of the building. Ahmed wanted to talk about its history. Sophia was more interested in its significance in pop culture, and I wanted to explore its role as a symbol of New York's identity during our first group meeting. It became clear that we were struggling to agree on a plan. We spent hours discussing and debating, but we couldn't seem to settle on a direction for the project. I felt frustrated, but I didn't want to push my ideas too hard. I wanted to be a team player, but it was difficult when everyone had such different opinions one evening. After another long and unproductive meeting, I walked back to my hotel feeling disheartened. This project was supposed to be fun, but it was turning into a source of stress. I didn't know how to resolve the situation, and I worried that we wouldn't be able to complete the project on time. When I got back to my room, I called my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in a few days, and I knew that talking to her would help me clear my mind. "Mama, I'm having a hard time with this project," I said, explaining the situation to her. My mother listened patiently, and when I finished, she gave me some advice that helped me see things more clearly. "Liza, sometimes in life you have to take charge, even if it's uncomfortable," she said. "You're learning, and part of that process is learning how to work with others. But if you feel strongly about something, don't be afraid to speak up. You have a voice, and your ideas matter." Her words gave me the confidence I needed to approach the next group meeting with a fresh perspective. I realized that I didn't have to be passive. I could help guide the group toward a compromise that worked for everyone. The next day, I arrived at the library where our group was meeting. I felt nervous but determined.